Okay, hello, welcome everyone. I'm Devin Laney, I'm the President and CEO of 36 Degrees North, and we are so excited about today's session about turning disruption into opportunity. And I know obviously that throughout this entire crisis, a lot of businesses, most businesses are trying to navigate and survive, and many are really focused on thinking in a very reactionary way, which is normal. But there's a great opportunity here in a situation like this to really think about how to turn this disruption, this challenge into opportunity, and how to move your business through this process so that by the end, when we get to the end of this, we will have been able to really weather the storm and exceed beyond that to emerge really stronger than before. And so we're thrilled to have Bill Fournet with us today. He's the CEO of Tulsa's award-winning management consulting firm, the Persimmon Group. He really works exclusively with leaders to help them thrive. And he's been doing this for a long time, over 25 years. He's led successful teams through several periods like this. And he shares a passion, really, I think, to enable practical change for businesses, for organizations. He's done workshops. He does a lot of advising. He's known locally and nationally, I think, for his optimistic view of disruption. And he really will help you, I think, today give us some real tips and strategies for staying ahead of the curve and finding opportunity in times of uncertainty. So, Bill, I will turn it over to you. I appreciate this. For those of you that are joining as participants, Bill and I discussed this before we started today, and we would really encourage you to ask questions throughout this session. We'd like this to be a discussion, a conversation, not a one-way presentation. So in the chats section, please, if you have any questions throughout, just submit those in the chat. And if we see things that we feel like deserve a little extra time or a little deeper dive with some of these areas, we'll actually stop the presentation, and I may call on those individuals that pose the questions to speak and ask those questions and begin those conversations directly with Bill. So please, we encourage those conversations throughout. But Bill, the show is yours.
I appreciate it, Devin. Thank you very much. As we get started, for everyone in the chat, some of you may know me as well. You feel like Devin said, if you've got something you want to share, a question you have, it can be anything either I'm talking about or outside of it. I want to hear from what those are. I'm going to put a question here in the chat, just kind of start us off, and that's going to be, what are some of your concerns or challenges that you see for the next 4 weeks? All right. So I'm going to leave that up there. You all can add to that, and I'm going to start us off with kind of a couple of things that I've been watching for, both in where we are in this cycle of disruption, but also as we try to look forward to the future as leaders and entrepreneurs. How do we reframe our thinking? And so I want to start with kind of 3 thought streams, and I want you to think about these like buckets of, there's certain decisions, there's certain information, there's certain things around your own business or your team that you're trying to ask questions about. And it's a great way of framing it because there's so much coming at us, we can just get lost with everything, right? So the first thought stream that I put out there is dealing with the information flow that's coming at you. So many of us got disrupted, especially in just the first couple of weeks, right? There's just so much change happening. What do we need to do with our team? Do we need to go remote? All of that type of stuff. And we were just reacting, usually with hair on fire as we were working through those, right? And the challenge on that is you're trying to start getting to where you can make decisions in a timely fashion that is based on data as opposed to just based on emotion. And so you see there kind of in the graphic is you've got all these things that are coming at you from your customers, from your team, from external forces like the government and other things, and you're just trying to figure out, how do I start to make decisions on solid data points? And I bring that up because as we do start to look at moving forward, and we've already seen that this week with some of the announcements, or at least the leading up to potential announcements, you're going to get disrupted again. So we're going to have more disruption coming. And the question is, I hear from at least most health leaders, and I try to watch where I get my information from as well, is it looks like this is going to be a slow roll back. So thinking right now, What am I doing to get good information, good context of meaningful information from my team members, my customers, my sources of data that I have out there? From that, the second set of decisions and framing of the bucket of decisions and actions is around short-term decisions. So originally it was, what do we got to do to get off site or work remote? What's the impact to my customers? What's the impact to my team? All of these questions were going on. And you're trying to, again, do those where they're not reacting. And you made the decision. So I'm on week 6 of quarantine. And I know there's decisions in week 2 because my team started to move off site 5 weeks ago. There were decisions we made in the first couple of weeks that were temporary. They weren't going to be decisions that we need to keep in place forever. It's recognizing that as I make a decision, you take some action, you need to then ask yourself, what's the intel telling me? What's the information and the data showing me from my customers? What's going on in the world around me, and where do I need to adapt or adjust some of those decisions? The third and final one, okay, is the one that I actually see most leadership teams miss the most. So most of us here are probably somewhere between 2 and 5 weeks into working remotely, dealing with the disruption and trying to figure out what's going on, right? The question then becomes, what does this look like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now? I have 3 sons, one in college and one here as a senior at Booker T. I could tell you on the college side right now, there's all kinds of stuff coming out, trying to wonder what's college going to be like in the fall. And my senior is going to be going to college as well. Is it going to be online? Some schools are talking about not having college classes until January of next year. All of those are data points. Now I can go act on those right now, but if I do, I'm probably going to act too soon and I'm going to have risk involved in that. The key is, am I listening for some of the trends, some of the changes that are going to happen out there, and especially those that intersect with opportunity for you and your business? So what are some of those trends that you think may stick? One of the things I've noticed, like as an example, has been right off the bat, travel, the whole notion of travel, the notion of training and traveling to conferences, of which I'm involved with at times, I believe is really going to go through a change when we come out of this. We're seeing it, we're hearing it from people. The idea of being able to realize that I can learn and watch things digitally and online is shaping the way that we may train or go to conferences or share knowledge and networking going forward. So that's one of those where I'm not going to go change my whole business, but I'm watching for it, I'm listening for it, I'm trying to decide, is there an opportunity in there then to start to work that into my business itself? So those are the 3 thought streams. What's the quality of the information and context that you're getting in real time? What are the short-term decisions that you need to make, and when do you need to adjust them? And what are some of the long-term trends that you're listening for? And then you're deciding when you want to take the step towards acting on potential opportunities. So with that, I want to give you 3 quick actions. And then if you've got questions on this, I've also got some things around innovation, preparing you for that disruption. But I want to pause after these 3 actions to see if there's any questions that we have. So the 3 actions that I would highly recommend for all of us is connection and focus around relationships, because all of us got impacted. First, we had connection and concern and care for our employees, but we also quickly saw that with our customers. And what were traditional physical or face-to-face business interactions, or non-essential versus essential services, caused businesses and leaders to start to rethink and reframe, how do I maintain that engagement with my customer? We saw even in the first few weeks, some people and some organizations that just kept going through sales the same way that they were doing it previously. And that could come off as inappropriate or untimely, and to the point of even being insensitive or callous. On the flip side, I saw businesses and have seen them where they've had to adjust and innovate to say, we can't be there. We can't sell what it is we were selling. We're all being impacted by this, right? But what we're doing then is we're focusing on how do we maintain our brand relationship? How do we find some new ways of connect and keeping that connection going on with that customer base that we believe is going to help support us afterwards? So to that end, internally with your teams, I highly recommend, and I know a lot of you all have been doing it, you've been doing it at 36 degrees north yourselves, is that finding some of those interactions, some of those meetups. How do we create that connectivity? I had a guest on earlier this week on one of my sessions that was his company does twice a day, just non-work, show up if you want to show up, cafe time. And that just is a place for people to hang out. And they've got 30, 40 people at a time sitting in this cafe, just not even breakout rooms, just all together, just hanging out. And they can talk and just, you don't have to work and you can just listen if you want. Those are really important because it's very easy in remote environments to think we just got to be working. The second one that's a big one for me is rhythms. Whenever you have disruption, and you're going to have this when we start to look at how we go back in the office and our customers come back online, then we're going to be watching is how do you manage through disruption? And the thing about uncertainty is that you don't know what's going to happen next. Having daily stand-ups or some sort of a frequent touch base with your team. My team meets every day at 7:45 in the morning for 15 minutes, and that's our all hands daily stand-up. And then I have one or two others that are just really short 15-minute sync-ups that what they do is they allow us to have a rhythm to know that we can come and talk about things. Do we know everything we're going to talk about going into those meetings? No. And that's the purpose. We know the meeting itself is what's creating the rhythm. It creates the moment of stability, recognizing I can sync up at this time. So I put some things up there on the screen. And by the way, I'll make this available for anybody who wants it. But these stand-ups are really great for being able to use it at an all-hands meeting or in a small team. And the reason they're so powerful is because if you're a leader, let's say that you have a larger organization or a large customer base, and that you can use these for that as well. It allows you to get direction and information out or from that group in a very short period of time versus having to go through email, text, chat, Teams, whatever your tools of choice are. It allows you to get everyone together to push information out or to get information. And that's what they're very good about. Sharing of lessons learned as an example. I put on there kind of a base agenda. For those that maybe are in agile environments as well, you're probably used to some of this a little bit from a software side, but I really like this because the intel sharing, that last item, I've watched now over 5 weeks of daily stand-ups, how we're getting better and better at sharing lessons and intel. And then my last action, and then I'm gonna open up for any questions as well, is really focusing on how do you plan in times of uncertainty. So on the left-hand side here, you see things that we choose to do. We make decisions, we take actions, we get information or intel. When you're trying to look at what do I potentially need to do, I'm not saying I'm going to act on it. I'm not saying I need to go detail plan it. But when I look at where I might want to go next, one of the best ways of thinking about that is saying, if this decision happens, if this action happens, what is my optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic next step or option? So optimistic says best case scenario. If this happens, then here's the best case scenario. So PPP was a big thing, right, with the payroll side. So optimistic is I'm going to get approval of this, and in doing so, I'm going to be able to pay my employees X, Y, and Z. Pessimistic may be that I'm not going to get approval at all, or there's not going to be any funds available. And here's where my pessimistic, maybe next steps need to be as well. And then lastly is what I call the realistic. And the realistic is where you really think it is going to land. Maybe I'll get approval, but maybe it's going to be further out than I thought. And therefore, I may need to consider, what do I do in this gap period of time? So in that case, I took one scenario, receive approval or submit an application for the PPP, and there's 3 potential outcomes coming off of that. So that's my third action, just for you to think about your thinking. It allows you to start to frame the what ifs. What would I do if this happened, and get you better on it. So with that, Devin, I was going to open up if there's any questions regarding the 3 thought streams.
Yeah, great. No, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that very much.
Yep.
We had a couple of questions come in actually around business development and how you touched on this, but how best really to balance business development with sensitivity and all the uncertainty that's taking place, not only with keeping those existing relationships with customers, but the new customers. How do you manage that process? What is that like? If you have any strategic thoughts around that, on how best to be able to really approach that during this time, I think that would
yeah. So I think that the hard part is that there's not a set formula, right? To say when should you go and approach a customer. And I think that this kind of falls into two places. One is going to be the customers that I have or had under my current business. And the second is going to be, where are there customers and opportunities that maybe I hadn't pursued yet that are being created from this point of disruption? So what I want to share with you all is kind of three perspectives that disruptions brought into this mix, especially in our remote environment. The first is the physical side. So the fact that we can't physically connect with so many of our customers, that creates a real challenge for us. And what you're trying to look at is, how do I recreate that in some form or fashion? So things like Zoom are a great example, Teams, those kind of things. How do I maintain some of that connectivity? And the one good thing I would say, if there is a good thing that's come out of all of this, is it's affected everyone at once. It didn't just affect one sector or one type of business. Everyone got hit with this. So they're all trying to figure out, how do we create connectivity and connections? So the physical is one aspect to say, how do I need to recreate that, and what's my timing? How do I approach it? The second one that I have up here is operational. And on the operational side, what you're trying to look at is, where do I need to reorganize and reshift some of my processes in those customer interactions to support them? And the last one, okay, is the biggest one. And this is the one that I think is the greatest impact and that you can affect the most. And that's affinity. And what affinity is, it's about trust. So we are in an environment right now where people have just gotten hammered with disruption, change, and uncertainty, right? People are dealing with all these new pressures, everything from working from home with the kids being at home and trying to keep them educated, to trying to figure out what I do with my customers. And I want you to think about that word affinity, because affinity is a powerful term. That's why I love this word, because it's where people choose to engage. And the hardest thing for a lot of businesses is, they want to go and they want to go get that revenue. They want to get that sale, and they want to keep it moving. And the challenge, I would say, that you have to really think through on the notion of affinity is, where is your timing as it relates to you building or affecting that trust relationship? So I'll give an example. I had a small business recently on one of my calls that was a scuba shop, and their issue was, we can't teach scuba training, and they actually also did trips. They would sponsor trips. So they were trying to figure out, what do we do in this environment? And they know they got hit, but what they did was they started shifting over into sharing about the places that their trips that are going to happen at some point in the future are. They started sharing about some training and just creating some connectivity. So what could you work on in a remote environment? And in doing so, they are keeping their brand and their relationship alive in the short term without asking for an actual sale. Now, if they start seeing enough traction, they might tip to a point where they realize, we want to start charging for this, or we want to offer another level of a relationship. So, it depends on what your business is focused on. I would say it always starts with just engaging with that customer to see how they're doing, checking in with them, kind of going back to that point of intel. And then based on that, deciding, when's a point where I believe I need to start now making an ask or putting a little bit of a pressure on that piece of it. So think about those on that whole first leg. On the second leg, I'm going to bring up innovation. And so this is a big one for me. This is my 4-box on innovation. I didn't create this. Tim Brown did in the bottom right. Great book, by the way. All kinds of companies are trying to figure out, okay, so what do we do with this? How does it affect us? And also, what do we do to go forward? Here's what I find, okay? Innovation, and especially right now, usually for most people, they think of innovation, it falls into one of two places. It falls into either the manage, which is incremental, which is not really major innovation. It's just sort of the 1.1 version of things, or it falls into the create, like, okay, this is happening. How can we take advantage of this? Where's there an opportunity that's so brand new nobody's thought of? That's the create or the revolutionary. So I'm going to use this as an example because we're all familiar with Uber. Uber was a revolutionary, as was Lyft, approach to the transportation and ride-sharing industry. Taxi cabs had owned it forever, right? But then Uber came in and did 180 degrees. Here's the challenge, okay? I want to share with you what the other boxes mean and where we see that right now most companies should be thinking and spending their time on their whole list of ideas of what do we think we need to change or what do we need to work on. Because this will give you some structure to think about how much time or effort you should spend on each one. So these other two boxes, besides manage and create, the first is extend. And Uber Eats is a great example of that. So here's what extend means. It says you have a market. You have a market that you've been serving. Inside that market, are there some potential other service offerings that you could make that still feed the relationship that you already have with that market? So if so, what are some of those new offerings that you could have? I'll tell you, in my team, we have launched a whole micro session approach of learning, which we had never really heavily pursued before, because we've been much more of an in-person, local, regional on the learning and training side. By doing that, we're all of a sudden getting people from all over the country jumping into our sessions and taking them, where we see that as a potential long-term viable business service line that we didn't have before. And so in that case, we were trying to figure out some angles here, how we could expand that. The second one is adapt. And so adapt is now where you're taking your same offering, but you're offering it into a new market. So Uber Pool is the example of that one, which was the cheaper version of Uber, right? For a new market of people that couldn't necessarily afford Uber, or Uber Black, etc. And so what that says is, here I already have a service that I know how to work it operationally, but now I want to extend that into a new area. Adapt and extend, by the way, manage, by the way, is this. This is what we joke about for manage. It was taxi cabs allowing you to pay in the back seat, which was not a big improvement. If your company is really trying to focus on the create, their issue with create is, where a lot of us, our ideas want to go to, is that it's a high risk. It's a high risk of failure and not having market opportunity. Extend and adapt are where we recommend you should be focusing some of your ideas and asking yourself, what do we do well? What are our strengths that we could extend into a new market? And or what's our strength in our market that we could potentially add some new service offerings to extend and grow that market further? Those are two that we really recommend you reframe and frame some of the ideas that you're having. And it will allow you to say, okay, I want to go try these that are lower risk as far as extend and adapt versus the create revolutionary. And the example of it that I loved that came up, and this was a couple of weeks ago, was White River Fish Market. They're in North Tulsa, which they put this ad out when everybody was looking for toilet paper and paper towels. And it was essentially a way of saying, hey, come here for our seafood. It said, we're here. We're out here, guys. Come join us. And by the way, we've also got toilet paper for you too. So it kind of was getting a little bit of what we would consider that extend. We don't just do seafood. We also now do paper products. That they were trying to look at saying there's an opportunity to keep their brand alive and to provide a service that they felt the community was needing.
It's a great example, Bill. Thank you. A question here too is coming in, and I think this kind of goes back to some of what you were speaking about earlier, and that companies are quick to react, maybe in not a positive way. They're being very reactionary, and I think a lot of our companies and members have seen and have felt the pull to respond very quickly. Got to respond to this situation quickly. I've got to make a decision today. I got to do this quickly. Yep. And you spoke about this earlier. So I would just say, what are some ways you're seeing companies react too quickly? And then on the flip side, what is your advice for companies who may have already made some of those bad reactionary decisions? And then what can they do now to help alleviate that? Those decisions?
Sure. So let me take the positive side. So I've had some customers and clients that early on, and I'm talking like 5, almost 6 weeks ago, they felt that we were going to have to move to a remote environment. And I'll tell you what worked really well. So I had some leadership teams that the leadership teams themselves decided to move and work offsite in preparation before they asked their employees. And some of the leaders on those teams didn't want to move. They did it to, one, work out their kind of peer-to-peer relationship, some of the nuances, but more importantly, they were using it to set the tone. That went fabulous. I mean, that went to the point where I had companies that really had moved into an operational environment that wasn't the same as what they were in the office, but was stabilizing. And I think one of the biggest challenges was the whole notion of, what do I do if I have to have physical resources in the field? And there were a lot of different kind of options around that, of how they were having to keep some people in the field and then some people working remote. On those that moved too quickly or too late, I think that the one thing that this kind of level of disruption does is, at first, it causes you to realize what is essential to your business and to you personally, your family. making sure they're taken care of, your core functions in your business and versus those that are ancillary. And so I saw businesses get focused really fast. It also allowed you to see where your cracks are, both in your processes or operations, but also in the people that you have, like get capability gaps and trying to watch for where maybe some of those handoffs or communications are. One of the biggest challenges I've seen in team management has been those that had really strong micromanaging, controlling leaders. That does not work in a remote environment. You have to focus more on engaging your team, setting a tone, giving them a sense of intent or outcome of what success looks like, things that I teach a lot about. And the reason you have that is because you can't be with them all day. That micromanaging leader will get all the information from team members in a remote environment. And so in that case, as they were working through it, companies have had to start really adapting very quickly to saying, can we stabilize? And I feel like in the last 2 weeks or so, they've started to normalize, and they're starting to shift some of their conversations first around like, what are we missing? Like team time. I mentioned earlier, my company does a happy hour every Friday, that kind of thing. The second is I'm starting to hear leaders now starting to ask about what is it going to look like, or what should we start asking as we start to move forward towards planning to go back into business, and what's that going to be like? So that's kind of the round answer of there's a lot of stuff that's gone on decisions. I think that the thing about disruption is it forces you very quickly that if you make poor decisions, you've got to look about how you adapt. On the customer side, I think that the biggest thing that both on customers, and I'm going to put employees in the same level, they are going to judge how companies responded to COVID. And that means everything from trust, as I mentioned earlier. Do I trust my leadership? Did my leadership make good decisions? There's some leaders that literally were like, we're not going to go remote, even though we can. We're just not going to. They're being judged by employees on that. On the flip side, on the customer side, it's going to get back into the notion of relationship and trust and timing. And so if you felt like you went too fast and you maybe were too pushy, engaging some of those customers and trying to drive towards continuing a business as normal, where they were in a very fragile place themselves, I think number one, you have to remember that when everybody gets hit with a crisis, you got to give a little grace, including to yourself, your team, and your customer. The second I would say is that just because you may have reacted that way initially does not mean you can't overcome that. And my main advice, as I mentioned earlier, is really engage the customer, see how they're doing. Ask the basic question, how can I help you? And that conversation can lead to new conversations that and ideas that maybe you didn't have before. And I think that's going to become really powerful.
Thank you for that, Bill. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Please, I want to just encourage everyone again, if any questions, any thoughts, anything you want to take a deeper dive into, please submit those to the chat. We'd love to call on you and have you ask those conversations, ask those questions directly to Bill throughout.
Hey, so Devin, I see there's one in the questions. I was going to, if I can hit that one, which is, do you have more examples of innovation that's happened historically through these kinds of periods? Great question. So I love history. That's what my degrees are in. And immediately when this was happening, I was going back and looking for where has this happened before and this scale of disruption. So for me, the most recent one would have been after World War II. The end of World War II was pretty disruptive. And if you look at the 50s, the 60s, and you compare that to what was going on before the war, completely different society. I mean, we didn't have suburbs prior to World War II. We didn't have these large multinational global corporations before World War II. We didn't have the notion of consumerism that we have today because of World War II. Now, the one right before that is the Great Depression. And there's a story that I'll share. I shared it in one of my blogs, and I love this story about innovation during the Great Depression. And it's about the film industry. So the first speaking film came out in 1927. That was The Jazz Singer. So we had silent films, but film industry was really new. In 1929, the Great Depression hits. Movie houses start closing all over the country. The industry is just rocked and about to go bankrupt. And there's two things that occurred that I think are really great lessons for us as we look forward for opportunity, as well as how we just handle the disruption. The first was the film industry realized we have got to get creative in keeping people to want to come to films because it's a luxury item. And in the Great Depression, you didn't have money. So what they did was they cut movie prices in half, or they would do 2-for-1s, two shows for the price of one. That meant also they had to start creating less expensive films. So cheap, or what we call B films, came out of that period. What that also did was allowed for all of these artists, these directors who wanted to become directors, they could make films faster and cheaply, which is where the directors that you think of that are famous in the 40s, the 50s, Hitchcock, all of these, Capra, they all came out of that B film period. So it infused this diversity of artistry that became the golden age of the 40s and especially the 50s of film. Even things like the horror films all came out of those B periods. The second that they did, though, was they listened to, in their case, their customers. Their customers were the movie house owners. And what movie house owners did was they listened to their customers and they started getting really creative. So they did things like give a dish night. They'd have a dish night where you would go to the movie. If you went to the film, you would get a dish, like literally a plate, and because that was in high demand. Or silverware, or they would have a potluck dinner. And that what happened was film houses started to become seen as this focal point that communities to come together in a social commonality. And it became a construct that evolved into a pillar of our society today. I mean, think about how important films are in our society. We talk about them, we rally around them. We can remember when we went and saw, I can remember when standing in line for Star Wars, right? So you can remember films, and they became this rally point that almost went bankrupt if they had kept their same business model. And in that case, they did all three of those thought streams. They got intel, they made short-term decisions like cutting prices and 2-for-1s. They then started to listen for the trends and realizing we're something more than a typical luxury item. We're a place that people want to be, and that becomes a part of the fabric of our society. So that was one that historically, I love that story because it said, listen, adapt, adjust, and then ultimately grow.
Great, thank you, Bill. The question here says, could you please tell us a time when you or your team have used your 3-step process that you discussed earlier to your advantage during this COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to hit the first two parts of the thought stream. So right off when COVID started and we moved, we closed our office the Monday, March 16th. So we had everybody move remote. We asked them to quarantine. We know some could not at the time, but we in general asked them. So at that point, we were doing a couple of things. We were using Thought Stream 1 to watch and listen to, 1, what are the needs from our team? 2, what were they hearing from customers? How are the customers adapting and adjusting? Because a lot of our customers where we're supporting with resources, we're already starting to move into their remote environments. And we wanted to make sure that we were supporting and assisting them and integrated with them. At the same time, we're also using it to listen to see, okay, what's going on in the sector or this industry or this customer? Are they going to shut everything down? Are they going to close? Are they going to stop projects? At the same time, I did 2 other things. On the short-term decisions, I have inside of my team, a team that focuses and helps me with a lot of my content on leading through disruption, kind of like what I'm sharing with you today. I saw, because I've been working on this for over a decade, that that clients and others were needing help on how do we adjust and work through this. So immediately, that preceding week, even for me, week 6, I'm having phone calls all the way through the weekend, working with clients, hearing about what their needs, their challenges are. That team is also working through that whole weekend. And what we did was we went through storming. As you guys are probably familiar, okay, the whole forming, storming, norming, and performing. Storming is when you're disrupted. We went through that really fast in that first week, trying to retool some things. I started standing up these daily calls that were free just to share best practices. Here's what's going on. These were 30-minute calls, and we brought in people that were from other companies. Anybody could come in. That was also doing Thought Stream 2, short-term effects, short-term changes. We then started coming up with some basic things like how do we better operate in Teams? We've not really used Microsoft Teams for very much at all. We've been using Skype. So not only did we deploy it, we made some decisions, but we created guidance on as a team how we were going to start to communicate. because we very quickly saw that we were getting hammered with 6 to 8 different communication channels and just couldn't keep up. So each one of those, we're taking intel, we're making short-term decisions, On the third thought stream, the micro sessions that we're doing now, the longer term communications of looking at how do you do some training that is shorter periods, but it opens it up to a greater audience. And it still has the source of what we know has made our training really solid, which is our content. The second was, like for me, I do a lot of coaching. So does some of my team. So we started testing some of these out and saying, let's put on online coaching, scheduling, and opportunities out there. We didn't start selling them. We wanted to prototype them because I view that most of what we've been doing right now is kind of prototype and proof of concepting to then see what starts to stick. And then the last one, which I think is also going to be something that's really going to stick with us. With Teams, with Zoom, with all of these others, typically, if you asked me to come and do a training or one of my team members to come and do training or teach you how to do something, we would go create a training process, a plan, we create materials, and you get training delivery. And what got me in the middle of all of this was I have one of my team members who is pretty heavy on my content and market strategy, but she also manages our website. One of the things we have to do on the website is you want to be responsive, so you got to change the website and update it pretty quickly. And she was the primary person that knew how to do that. I had other team members that their jobs had changed pretty substantially, moving into a remote environment versus a physical one. And so part of what we did was we said, let's take one of our team members who has availability and let's teach them how to be able to do the website update so that you don't have to do that and you can focus on more of the strategic direction stuff. And when doing so, that person recorded how they go through doing their updates in Microsoft Teams, shared the video with the other person, and other people could do it now as well. And we realized, wow, just like we see on YouTube, it means the big duh when you look back at it, taking some of that and doing the basic walkthrough of recording of just basic process steps or a system tool or how to do something, I think that is going to be a substantial stick for companies long term. It's cheaper, it's immediate, it allows you to give some context as you're doing the training that you don't necessarily get when you're reading a script or reading a step-by-step guide. I think that both internal for organizations and external to customers, that's going to become powerful. So that's another one that we saw that, again, went through all three thought streams and that we're seeing, we believe is going to start to resonate long-term. How do I create that sort of customer touch and feel without having to have them always there in person, but also without having to go through a massive, document generation approach as well?
Yeah, great. That's a great answer. Thank you, Bill. I have a question myself here that I was just been thinking through during the conversation, which is, as a lot of companies, small businesses, startups are struggling, trying to navigate the situation, as you said, trying to not just maybe be reactionary, but think a little bit proactively about things. There's a negative side here that I've had multiple conversations with entrepreneurs about, which is they're not sure what this has shown them is that as they think about the future of their business and they think about maybe the industry they're operating in and where they're headed, that they may not have the right individuals on their team to be able to implement those new directions going forward.
Right.
And I would love if you have just some thoughts around the struggle there for founders and CEOs and leaders of businesses looking at their team, trying to navigate the situation both from a financial standpoint, but also, as you said, through the three-step process, they're looking at how to go forward and maybe realizing that they don't have the right people on the team and how you navigate that.
Yeah, so I think you're right. And I'm going to add one to that, Devin, that with everything we've been going through for the last few weeks, what you had was this also more in this intensity of pressure of timing, right? Because if you wait too long, you miss the opportunity or you just blew a relationship.
Right.
So as an entrepreneur myself, I think one of the positives is you're directing, you're owning, you're thinking, right? This is part of what made you an entrepreneur. It's what made you a business owner. The downside on that is you can't be in all places at all times. And so one of the challenges that I see in decision making, a lot of entrepreneurs, we live oftentimes by our gut instincts, our feel, right? of what's going on. And that's awesome. But when you're trying to manage in this scale, meaning that we're remote, you're trying to figure out where those options are, you cannot be single threaded. You cannot go and talk with everybody that you know and somehow make decisions on that. So there is a discipline aspect, and I'm going to share this. It's actually one of the slides I queued up for you guys today and thinking it might come up. I like this slide a lot because here's something I think that you can teach and work with your team on. Before you make the call about whether they have the capability or you got the right people on the bus or not, I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, as a leader, have you given the clarity of what your expectation is from the team or the industry? So in this example where you see mission, this is what you're working on. It could be a new product, it could be a new piece of software, it could be an update, it could be just what you're doing today. And the purpose of this slide is to show that when anybody's trying to create something new or different, some change, when you go and you're going through those steps, like think of a product launch. What do I think the product should be? My ideation period. What do I want? Is there a market opportunity for this? How do I connect with the market? All those questions. Each one of those decisions has information or data coming at it. And if you're giving that off to some of your team members and saying, I want you to go figure out, what's this idea? Let's run with it for a little bit. Let's figure out if this new idea could possibly stick. What I see as the failure in most product launches and product teams is they keep going even though the signs were there saying this isn't going to work. And what this does is, for the leader, it allows them to let the team run to a point. And that point is the end of the mission, whatever that mission may be. It may just be go do fact finding of a market opportunity. At the end of that mission, the team comes back to the leader and makes a recommendation, and they can make only one of these 5 recommendations. So what it does is it says, when you come back to me and you say, hey, we did all this work, we've done this analysis, or we worked on this, talked to these customers, here's what we recommend. The recommendation is either kill it, meaning don't proceed forward, pause it, meaning maybe it's a good idea, but it's not the right timing. We need to hold for a little bit, or maybe it's more expensive than we thought. Adjust it. We started with this idea, but as we went through the analysis, we realized that we actually need to tweak it a little bit and make it more like this. Proceed. Proceed says we're going to go to the next step. Whatever that was originally discussed, we're going to go to the next milestone, or for the gamers out there, to the next waypoint. And then there's exploit. And exploit says, based on what we learned, we need to go faster. We need more focus on this. We have an opportunity that we need to take advantage of now. So those are the 5. And I believe as an entrepreneur or leader, if we share that expectation with the team members, we're going to get better recommendations coming back. And the team is already going to be thinking about the next steps. So if you do that, that will give you better clarity about where some of your gaps may be in your team members. And then you have to ask yourself, between the sense of urgency or timing, the current capability, where I need the capability to be, and how do I close that gap? Can I close the gap? Timing is the wild card in all of this. It's the one that puts the pressure on those 2 questions of where am I today and where do I need to be? That's going to help you to decide what kind of actions you may or may not need to take. But I find that sometimes we lead too fast into saying they don't get it, they don't have it. I need a different team, or I didn't need different team members. Where instead, one of the things we may have needed was a little bit better clarity of discipline about what our potential outcomes of a decision may be, and what do you recommend we do. That will enable you to also get more innovation and ideas from your team members as well.
Great, thank you for answering that. I think that's really good advice, not just during this period, but for a business at all times, for leadership to think through its mission in that way and exploring those new opportunities. Okay, well, I want to pause and just ask if there are any additional questions, any other thoughts coming in?
Well, while you're doing that, Devin, if I can, I want to just mention that back to your last question, I do have 2 things in here that I wanted to share with you all. See, they're in here. Come to this. I do have 2 sessions coming up. So I wanted to share these with you all that are next week. These 2 sessions help to address a little bit of what you were just saying, Devin, or asking. They focus on how do you empower your team with clarity about what the results should look like. And the second one, which is the leading through disruption, is how do you align them in their judgment? I teach these two techniques. They're called leader's intent and leader's guidance. Those two things focus on the what and why, as well as the how. And they work regardless of the type of environment that we're in. But they're really important because they enable you and the team to address and confront disruption and change in a much more disciplined or smooth way, as opposed to feeling like you're just reacting on everything.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, thank you very much. And can people find those?
You can get those on the Persimmon website here up at the end. It is at the persimmongroup.com site. You'll see those on there. They're $45 each. They're both kind of workshops. So each of these have a pre-session that you get to watch the video on your own time. It's got a little bit of it teaches you the technique, and then you actually would submit your assignment ahead of the live session. And then we're actually going to review some of those assignments in the live session, so you can walk out of there being able to apply those to your team immediately. Because these are two of my favorite and most game-changing techniques that I use and work with clients on, because they can change the way a team operates very quickly. And also make sure that from a leader side, I know that they're aligned. And that's a key thing for me in this day and age. And what we've seen with the whole COVID response has been, we've got this on steroids right now. Right. And so that's what you have out of it. It's got a Q&A session for each of them on the back end. But I wanted to share those as well, because I think they may be valuable, especially for entrepreneurs when we're trying to figure out how to scale or adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yep.
We did have a question come in from Kristen Towles. Kristen, I'm going to allow you to ask the question in case you can frame that in your own way.
Sure. So the question is, Kristen, you want to come in?
Yeah, Kristen, awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey. So we are a small team.
Okay.
About 3 people on staff. We're a startup. We just celebrated our first year in January.
Awesome.
And so one of the challenges that I'm having is my team members, while they're able to get done things that I delegate to them, finding other people that are aligned with my thinking of, the focus of the topic today, innovation and creativity. So do you have any thoughts on how I could find others to kind of help brainstorm and think strategically?
Others inside your organization, Kristen, or outside?
It'd have to be outside, yeah.
Sure. So I think a couple is putting the ask out there and within your own team. Who do we know that may be able to bring some ideas or challenge some of our thinking as well in a brainstorming fashion? And I think the key component is, what do you want to get out of the brainstorming? So if it's just literally ideation, getting a lot of different ideas, creative thoughts, that's different than trying to brainstorm solutions, let's say. And that's different than having a sounding board or somebody who's kind of taking some of the thinking and challenging you and your team a little bit, maybe to look at things differently. So are there any of those 3 that you're kind of seeing, this is where I'd want it to go?
Yeah, all actually.
Okay.
Because we're B2B, and so we're having to help clients think through what does their new sales model look like.
Okay, that's good. All right.
And they don't always have the expertise to think through it themselves either. Absolutely.
So a couple of things that I will tell you that I've even done with my team. So if it's on the pure ideation side, I will do 2 things. One is I will spin some of my team up to go do some research, to go feel out what's going on in the marketplace. The second, so for me, I stood up those daily calls, and I was running those every day from 12:30 to 1 until the end of last week. And this week I started just on Tuesdays and Fridays. I'm slowing the rhythm down. I used those partly because I wanted to hear ideas from other people. And so by hearing some of those ideas from other people, it caused my ideas to get not only more diverse, but more and prolific. And that was huge, because I may only take a small percentage of those ideas and do something with them, but I wouldn't have gotten some of those ideas if I hadn't had the calls. So I set up something that was both beneficial to originally my customers, but then it broadened into markets that were beyond my customer base that helped them, but also helped me by getting diversity of ideas on it. So that was a really good way of getting ideation. On the solutioning side, that's where I think that if you and your team know of certain people, whether they're in your business sector or not, that are just really good people who ask questions, people who solve problems, I would bring that together into a session and then put out an invite. Hey, we have an hour. We got a couple things. I really respect your thoughts. Would you be willing to join us for that? I'll add one other one, that the biggest miss, kind of going back to that thought stream number one around Intel, that I find is that people start bringing solutions up front before they've framed up the questions that need to be asked. And so I highly, highly recommend, it's a great way, by the way, of assessing, to your question earlier, Devin, your team members, is what questions would you ask? Because one of the biggest challenges when you're going through disruption is, are you just asking the same questions and looking through the same lenses that you did previously? Or are you recognizing some things are different? I mean, I'll tell you from my end, marketing to micro sessions to a mass audience is very different than marketing to a local audience that knows your brand already. Very different. So in that case, you're trying to use that to bring in and saying, wait, what are the questions that we think we need to get answers for these decisions or these next steps or these solutions? And then who can help me come in, broaden those questions, and to help me work through some of those answers. And the last one, which is the sounding board. The sounding board needs to be people who you either trust closely because they're going to be really blunt and honest with you, or you just kind of know and you respect that they've got kind of a view of the market, meaning that they're seeing and hearing. So I have a lot of clients for me, executives that are, I coach them, and they're asking me, like, what are you seeing and hearing across companies? How are they approaching these situations? And that allows me to bring in what I'm hearing and seeing as insights across industries and companies that can then be applied into their environment. So they're using me as a sounding board to challenge them. And so you're looking for who's that kind of that person or people. Could be somebody in the industry, could be a customer or customers that you really trust, that you want to kind of bounce off, and you're couching it as, okay, here's some things we just want to focus on. Are these even doable? What are the challenges? Help us identify the risk or the issues with these problems. And that'll strengthen your team as well. And your team, the cool part is that you and your team are just absorbing all of this as you're going through it, and it's going to make you stronger for when you come out of this. Did that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, Kristen. Thank you for the question. Bill, I guess we're getting close to the end of our time here. I want to thank you and your team for helping put this together and putting together the content and presenting it so well today, and sharing your thoughts and strategies during this time. And I also want to thank all of our participants for joining and listening today and asking questions. And we just would encourage everyone to visit the Persimmon Group website, look for those 2 sessions coming up. I think those could both be very helpful, and would also encourage everyone to visit the 36 Degrees North website. We've got a great list of resources and events coming up as well that we would love to have everyone join us for if possible. And certainly we'll make all of these slides. Bill will make all these slides. We'll share those, make sure they get out to everyone who attended the session.
Debbie, can I share this last slide real quick with everybody, just as a parting shot, I guess?
Yeah,
I love this picture because it is a tree that figured out how to adapt in a really bad situation. I feel for this tree. I just want to leave you all with, we're going to continue to have uncertainty. I mean, there's uncertainty about what the fall is going to look like and the winter, right? And so my leaving advice, or I guess parting shots, are, one is, don't just react. Try to figure out how you can start to adapt intentionally, and accept that some things are going to fail. Okay. Remember to give grace as you go through this. The second is, keep your eyes wide open. And that doesn't mean just you. That means your entire team. That's the getting of the intel. What's being said, what's going on out there. Because the thing about long-term things that stick in our society, that thought stream number 3, the hardest part for any business person is you don't have any real control over that. You don't really. The society does. There's a lot of great ideas that never stuck because the society just didn't get on board with them. And so think about that. You want to be listening and watching, and then figuring out where you may want to take some risk and you see opportunities. The second is, be clear to set really clear priorities and parameters. And that may only be for like a week. And maybe, guys, we're in the middle of this change. We don't know everything that's going to happen. This is what I want us to focus on and the priorities that I have for this week, but they may change next week. And parameters are the boundaries in which, how much freedom and authority do you allow your team members to have? And the last one is the focus. That's something all of us as leaders can do. We can control this. We can control where we want our team to focus. And how do we carve out what are those core things that are important that we focus on versus all of the things that come at us, whether that's the customers, whether that's product, whether that's decisions operationally. So just think about those as you go through them. If you do those, you will navigate through disruption, and you will learn, and you will come out so much stronger from it. That to me is the thing about disruption, is it creates immense opportunity. It also lets you see what you got and where you need to go, maybe clean or shore some things up and improve them in your own organization. So Devin, that's it. I wanted to just thank you on that as well.
No, great final comments, Bill. Thank you very much. Very timely and appropriate. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who attended. Again, we appreciate all of you there. Stay strong, stay safe. We're going to get through all this. And hopefully, as Bill said, it presents a great opportunity for all of us to really think about our businesses and how better to go forward. So, Bill, thank you. Participants, thank you. And we will
thank you all.
See you all soon. Thanks.
Everybody be safe.